And there are going to be some. Okay, thanks everyone.
Great. So thanks so much for everyone for joining us here today. The coalition is really thrilled to have Jerry Nussbaum and Irwin Elman as they discuss Janusz Korczak and his influence on children's rights. So today, Jerry and Irwin are going to talk a little bit about the proposed Janusz Korczak chair at UBC, as well as why Korczak matters in today's world. They're also going to talk a little bit about the Janusz Korczak Association. So just to give some more context here, so Jerry Nussbaum is the president at the Janusz Korczak Association of Canada, and Irwin Elman is a global strategic advisor at Laidlaw Foundation. He was appointed as the provincial advocate for children and youth to provide leadership to the Advocate's Office, which was the first independent office of its kind in Ontario, to amplify the voices of children and young people. So without further ado, welcome Irwin and Jerry.
Good morning. Thank you very much.
I'll just say, and then I'll hand it over to Jerry. Thank you to the coalition. I've been a member of the coalition for a while too. I really love what leadership, Kate, you're bringing to us, and you too, Daniela. And if people haven't seen Daniela, you did an article that was just published about the child and youth advocates, which was it's a good article for people to read because it's written from a distance, so it's not written by one of the child advocates, and I think it's really useful. So it's great work. Put the link, if I could encourage you, Danielle, put the link in the chat so people see it. And you're doing some great work too, as you know. I think that. I'll put in the chat. I guess I'm sitting in the territory of the Mississauga, New Credit, Anishinaabeg people, Wendat, and Cherokee people. It's amazing that, it's not amazing. To me, sometimes it's amazing that I didn't know where I was before, and now there's something, at least where I can say what land I'm on, that I never knew I was before, and I can say it without having to look it up. I try and remember that every day where I am. I just want to say I began thinking about Janusz Korczak when I was the advocate, and I thought, oh, could we sort of try and tell residential care providers that there was a possibility for developing a rights-based culture and doing their work differently? And I thought, well, if Janusz Korczak could do it in the circumstances he was in, and become the father of children's rights, could we promote him? And so I reached out to the Janusz Korczak Association of Canada, and I would say truly somebody should have warned me, because then I met this force that's Jerry Nussbaum, and if anybody's met him, oh my gosh, he gets you to do things. I thought I was good at that. No, Jerry is good at that, and he got us to, he didn't really get us, he encouraged us and supported us to publish a couple of books, to try and hold events. And when I left being the child advocate, he encouraged me, and because of who he is, his force, I decided to try and stay with him and be supportive as I could. That's how I got involved into this, and I'm going to turn it over to Jerry.
Okay, thank you for such a wonderful, wonderful introduction. My dear friend Erwin, we really know each other for a number of years, so it's really time to make all those remarks. But I would like also to thank all of you who decided to join us for this presentation. And special thanks to Kate Butler and Daniela Bender, and of course, Canadian Coalition for Children's Rights for graciously hosting us today. A special presentation of special appreciation to Irwin Elman for his continuous support over many, many years, and his unwavering encouragement and enthusiasm towards our endeavors. and for his wisdom and experience he has been sharing with us. Yes, Erwin, I'm talking about you. Erwin was a part of several of our lectures and Korczakian conferences happening, believe it or not, between Toronto, Vancouver, Seattle, and Warsaw, Poland. Irwin is a brilliant, passionate, dedicated, and enthusiastic advocate for children, tirelessly persevering in his quest to better the lives of children in need in every possible way. And we sincerely hope that his effort will immensely contribute to our goal of establishing the endowed chair, Janusz Korczak chair at UBC. And before we go any further, we are on the Musqueam land, unceded land, and actually currently it's Musqueam land, but we used to live in the reserve, Musqueam River Reserve. Shall we move from now to the presentation about Korczak himself? Sharing screen will be fine, right?
Yes, Jerry, I made you a co-host, so you should be able to just share your
Excellent, excellent. So I would like to share a couple of things with you. Just let me get here. Bear with me another half an hour a bit. Can't find it. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, okay. I'm there. We're okay. Yes.
It looks good, Jerry. We can see it.
Okay, excellent. So a few words about the presentation about Korczak, just to introduce the person to you. Dr. Korczak, Janusz Korczak, is one of the true moral heroes of the 20th century. He was born in 1878, to put it in some time frame, in Warsaw, Poland, as Henryk Goldschmidt. He was Polish, Jewish, author, pediatrician, and humanitarian, a trailblazer in the field of children's rights, and decades an orphanage director, where he put his pedagogical philosophy into practice. Dr. Korczak's legacy is profound and remains influential. He was a pioneer advocate for children's rights, and his writings were integral to the 1989 United Nations Charter for Children's Rights. He died as he lived alongside his children at the hands of the Nazis in Treblinka death concentration camp in 1942. Following his high school graduation, Korczak enrolled in a medical school. He did, however, have a real interest in literature, to which he devoted all of his free time. Upon his graduation from medical school in 1905, Korczak was mobilized to Russo-Japanese front. It is probable that the atrocities of that war have paved Korczak's path, first that of pediatrician and then of a pioneer advocate for children's rights. After his return from the front, Korczak returned to his pediatrics practice, and to expand his knowledge, he spent extended time abroad, a year in Berlin, 6 months in Paris, and some time in London. Over the time, he developed sensitivity to social issues, which can be expressed in his words. So you can read, while medicine can prevent and cure illnesses, it cannot turn people into better individuals. Korczak's professional activity as a physician became less intensive with time, as he devoted more and more attention to education, in his view, a more effective way to contribute to the society, social environment, and improving the world. Korczak was a man of many accomplishments, but perhaps the most impressive is that he truly put his philosophy into practice. For over 30 years, he was an orphanage director. There, the principles that he espoused in his writing played out in reality. Dr. Korczak's orphanage was based on a unique system of democracy known as Children's Republic. Children at the orphanage were citizens of democratic community, which included a parliament, a code of law, and a code of peers, and a children newspaper. The purpose of the code was to maintain order and prevent injustices and to protect the rights of individual children. The code of law advocated for forgiveness and mercy. That's quite an important part of it. Forgiveness and mercy. The rules at the Children's Republic were set by children and for the children. There was no domination, no discrimination. Where our current system imposes judgment of children, Korczak believed in their full participation. Although he was a father figure to hundreds, he was not paternalistic, but empowered children and believed in respecting the child as a foundational principle. Dr. Korczak approached children with respect and love, dignity and equality. Dr. Korczak's goal was to engage children in a dialogue, finding a common language with children, understanding how children experience adults, and on the other hand, to comprehend adults' views of children. Korczak possessed a unique gift of seeing the world from the child's perspective. And in a dialogue and partnership with children, his philosophy evolved with input from their shared experience. There exist memoirs of Korczak's former pupils. An example is a biography of Shlomo Nado, translated and published by our association in cooperation with Irwin Elman in his capacity as a provincial child advocate of Ontario. I myself met with Shlomo Nado many times. It was towards the end of his life of a successful family man and professional photographer. 60 years after the death of Korczak and 70 years after he left for orphanage. Those are quite important numbers because Shlomo had tears in his eyes every time he talked about Korczak. Shlomo was a humble man and lived modestly. When I visited him at home for the first time, I needed to use the washroom and I accidentally opened the door to his bedroom instead. There, over his bed, was a huge portrait of Dr. Korczak. Incidentally, the only painting in the whole house. Korczak was a pioneer advocate of children's rights. As we said, he protected children and shielding them from atrocities. Korczak believed that children should have their place in the family and in society. They should have a right to education, good health, good nutrition, and good hygiene. Probably climate issues should be added here. Children should have the right to voice their opinions, right to be heard, and adults should listen to their views. Each child has the right to be what he or she is meant to be. Korczak's beliefs crystallized in the following quotation. Children are not people of tomorrow, but are people of today. They have the right to be taken seriously and to be treated with tenderness and respect. They should be allowed to grow into whoever they are meant to be. Korczak insisted that there could be no human rights without children's rights. And he believed that these rights should be universal and irrespective of religion, culture, or place of origin. He believed that children brought up in healthy and happy environment become happy, productive, and creative adults. Pope John Paul II described Korczak as, and here's a quote, a rare human being, symbol of religion and true morality. Critically for Korczak, children's rights came hand in hand with responsibility. That's, by the way, quite an important message of Korczak. Part of respecting children for him was not to overprotect them, and not to make them and to make them an integral part of the way their world functioned, purposefully and actively engaging in their environment rather than being passive bystanders and passive recipients of adults' experiences. Korczak placed respect for the child at the heart of his vision and sought to empower children and give them a voice in their own fate in a way that can serve as a beacon that can guide us toward what is possible. Dr. Korczak's legacy has never been more relevant than it is today. He dedicated his life to children and ultimately sacrificed his life for the love of children. He himself gave up the possibility of personal rescue. He rejected suggestions to go beyond the ghetto borders. The fact that Janusz Korczak did not leave the children taken away by Germans to Treblinka was, after all, an inevitable consequence of previous choices and decisions that follow throughout his life. And now over to Erwin.
Thank you, Jerry. You know, Jerry's heard me. I told Jerry 100 times this story about. I worked in child protection with supporting young people leaving care for 20 years, maybe more, from 1986 to 2006 or so. Then I worked in children's mental health. I'm a teacher by training, have a master's in education, and I was involved in what we call the youth engagement, child engagement. I now say it's industry, the many discussions about how to do this, how to involve children, and then later in the child rights. And it wasn't until the year 2000 when I was in Japan, of all places, and I was working in a children's home there, that one of the workers in the children's home, because I guess they knew I was Jewish, which was unusual to them, said, "Oh, so you must like the writings of Janusz Korczak." And I said, "Who?" And then they were outraged that I didn't know who that was, surprised. And so I had to Google and started Googling, and I learned about him. And I was thinking, this is when I first heard, how could I be involved in all this work for 20 plus years and have a few degrees in the work that I was doing, and I'd never heard of, not one peep. I thought, that is astounding. And then I realized that probably it's a North American thing, because if you go to Europe, when I did, and when I started asking people, of course, he's the father. You go to Europe, of course, we know who he is. There is even a word, Jerry would say, I've heard there's people that, and Jerry's probably one, he's a Korczakian. Yet here, the wealth of knowledge, and he was like Jerry didn't mention, like he did all this work, but he also is a writer. So you can find his writings, his articles, his books on child rights. Well, he doesn't even call it that, but how one of his most famous, How to Love a Child, was really about child rights, is there. I don't know why it's not required reading in our systems. Well, I have thoughts, but that's not today. So I don't want to say much more except this one thing. It's a story, and I don't know if it was Shlomo Nadel, who I never met, that Jerry spoke about, but I did meet people who knew him, including Jerry, but also the person who helped write down his biography, which we translated into English. Might have been him, but since he didn't tell me exactly, might have been from somebody else. And what I heard was this. There's this orphanage, and I did get to see it thanks to the Korczak Association, because I did get to go to Warsaw, and when I was to speak at a conference and with them. And then because I did that, I did get to see what was left of one of the orphanages. So there's this orphanage and there's, I don't know, say 100 children there in a ghetto, in the Warsaw ghetto. And at the time it's really difficult, right? Like the circumstances are difficult. And they're running the orphanage in the way Jerry explained. And one night, or a number of nights, I don't know, on occasion, food was scarce, but the story was told by one of the people who lived in the orphanage that Dr. Korczak would go out and find whatever cake he could, sweets, in the ghetto and bring it back to the orphanage. And he would put it at a night on the edge of each child's bed. I can picture, so I saw some rooms where, there's rooms where bed upon bed upon bed, their kids are sleeping. And the person who told me the story said, the person who lived there, who's now an adult, said, and you know what? That cake that we had when we got up in the morning tasted like love. I don't ever want to be told that's not a real story. I'm going to assume it's a real story. I do not want to lose that story. And, I talk about, if you know me or have ever heard me, and today you'll have evidence, I'm a simple guy. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a human rights practitioner. I'm not a child rights practitioner. I'd like to think of myself as like Bruce Springsteen said, I'm a poor man in a rich man's shirt. Simple. And that's why that story resonates with me, because I have said, and it came from a conversation with a deputy minister, yes, it's true, you cannot legislate love, but you can create the conditions in which love can flourish. And for me, I do not think that love can flourish without children being afforded their rights by duty bearers. I don't think so. Not flourish. It can exist, maybe. You can call it respect or dignity or whatever, if that word love triggers you. But I don't think it can flourish without that, and I think Korczak proved it. And that's what I want to say now, and I'm turning it back to Jerry.
Well, let me put it this way. I try to share a screen. Hopefully, we'll get somewhere with it. First of all, the story about the cake. I've heard the story from the source, meaning one of the boys that was at the orphanage. Regretfully, this was the last person that was still alive. That was one of his kids, Itzhak Belfer, but this was verified by the other fellow that was there at the same time in the orphanage, and then that's Shlomo Nader. So it's really touching, but that's a sort of a reflection of the ambience of the place, how those people were close to each other. And at the same time, what's very important, you have an orphanage that at the time usually was around 100 kids. At the time of war in the ghetto, it was 200 or over 200 children there. But those kids were either orphans, very young orphans, like age 6, 8, 10, mostly, or they were coming from extremely poor families. So there was so many issues, not just a orphan child growing, but there were issues attached to it. So yeah, I thought it was a good illustration, good reflection of the way the orphanage was. I would like to tell you a few words about the association as such before we get to the presentation about the chair. It's a very short presentation, but the goal of Janusz Korczak Association of Canada let me get, is to promote Korczak's vision of education and well-being of a child. And association strives to disseminate dissemination of knowledge about Korczak and ideas in order to better integrate it into contemporary legal, social, and pedagogical theories and make it the basis for cooperation among educators, welfare workers, researchers, physicians, lawyers, and children's rights activists. After all, Korczak philosophy was fundamentally about caring for the whole child. It is a holistic approach that considers children's well-being from diverse angles. With this in mind, we've forged close ties with a number of organizations and individuals actively involved in child welfare, centered on the key areas of Korczak pedagogy. And those are Faculty of Education, BC representative for children and youth, our Ombudsman, Lieutenant Governor of BC, Social Pediatrics, Access to Justice, BC, and so on. I will tell you in not many details about common activities that we have with those organizations. In the field of education, we cooperate with the Faculty of Education at UBC, and here are some of our projects with Faculty of Education. Hold on, let me just get rid of one thing, and it will make maybe my life a little bit easier. Right. So we, for example, right now we have a course in interdisciplinary studies graduate program featuring Dr. Korczak's legacy. And this course introduces students to the foundation of children human rights. So the course, as you can see on the left, it's about children human rights, but of course the background is Dr. Korczak's philosophy. Then the other project is How to Love a Child. It was there were 6 interdisciplinary and interprofessional lectures and panels discussions back in 2016-17. And the goal of the series was to consider a broad set of issues in order to present and the diverse challenges that must be addressed in the fields of, again, education, children's rights, health, and to encourage the professionals working in those fields to closely cooperate. As you can see on the picture on the right is our friend Irwin Elman. The next one is the Faculty of Education Dean's Distinguished Lecturer, Janusz Korczak, the father of children's rights. That's annual event. There's a number of years we've been having it every October, November at the Faculty of Education. We invite keynote speakers, and those are very, very prominent speakers. Some come like on the left, you'll see Marta Santos coming from United Nations, a very prominent person fighting for children there. She had a wonderful presentation. This year, just a couple of weeks ago, we had as a keynote speaker Cindy Blackstock, and a whole big deal of other presentations, including we always squeeze in a few minutes presentation about Dr. Korczak. That's our way of smuggling to the whole audience a story of Korczak, and you know, it's an excellent circumstance, it's excellent forum, because those are people that are interested in children's rights. And forum this year, I keep repeating it a number of times a day. We had over 800 people attending it, so it was good attendance. The next one we had in 2019, we had this UBC Summer Institute for Teachers, child advocacy in action, and there was a legacy, the legacy of Janusz Korczak. We supported with it, we organized, we initiated, we use wonderful services of Dr. Tatiana Cyrillina Spadi, and we invited speakers from Pittsburgh, Montreal, Vancouver, Victoria, Paris, Warsaw, different places, different expertise, different views. I believe it was very interesting summer school for teacher. The next one, we offer a Korczak, annually Korczak Association of Canada Graduate Scholarship, and it's offered, how shall I put it? It's offered annually to outstanding graduate student in the Faculty of Education whose research is focused on children's rights or Canadian Indigenous education in the field of early childhood education. We offer it for the last quite a number of years. Then the next project, it's BC, it's together with BC Representative for Children. We do it annually together. It's a Korczak medal that you can see on the left side. And the Janusz Korczak medal is awarded annually for working towards improving children's rights in a way that encourage love for children, listening to children, and fostering healthy children's lives and building capacities in children in the spirit of Dr. Korczak. So the next one, it's a project, Lieutenant Governor of BC is our honorary patron. So you see on the right side at the bottom, the logo. It's of course important for us to have a support, and the event awarding the statuette is done together with the Lieutenant Governor. Of course, we very much appreciate it, and it's awarded annually for lifetime achievement in child advocacy and for vision and leadership in promoting the holistic approach to the well-being of children in the spirit of Dr. Korczak. Just as a side remark, a small footnote, attending this presentation, Mr. Irwin Elman was the recipient of this statuette a number of years ago. Now the next group, it's a social pediatrics. We participate in the research project. At the same time, we annually present the Korczak Association and Canadian Social Pediatrics. We offer this medallion that you see on the side together with a nice certificate. And again, we support the research project in a way we're involved in it, but we also support it to some extent financially. The next group, it's really a legal story. It's access to justice. That's the name of it, A2J, Access to Justice BC. And the initiative is, it's a common initiative, Access to Justice and a Korczak Association of Canada. It's a network of justice sector leaders chaired by the Chief Justice of BC, Robert Bauman, and it's co-hosted by us. It's an online dialogue on taking an intersectoral approach to the family justice. We're participating in and supporting it financially, a 6-part seminar and entitled an intersectoral approach to achieving child youth well-being in the family justice system, supporting a paradigm shift. And we have a limited group of about 100 or a touch over 100 participants. So different views, different professions, very inspiring, very interesting conversation that many young people are involved in it. And I think it's going to be quite fruitful. The last session, it's in May of next year. Then there's BC Association of Social Worker, and we established an award and certificate for outstanding young social worker. A prize will be awarded to a BC young social worker, first 5-10 years of service in recognition for the contribution to improving children's lives and well-being in a way that reflects the teachings of Dr. Korczak. Each of those events, it's really, in reality, it's also includes the presentation about Korczak in some form, some manner. Now, talking about the publications that Erwin was mentioning, we published number of books. Some were written in English, but mostly translated from Polish, from Hebrew, from Yiddish, and you can see there's on the left upper side, there's 2 volumes of Korczak himself, selected writings. Then there's a biography. There's also bibliography of Korczak, and at the bottom right corner, you see 3 memoirs. 2 out of those 3 published together with the Ontario association, not association, but advocate. And by the way, all those 3 are online, and you can free access, so you can, at your will, you can read those books. There's a couple of albums, couple of exhibitions in addition to it. All of it, it's at januszkorczak.ca. And before we get to the chair, the last thing, it's Korczak Digital Archives. It was launched just a year ago, over a year ago, and it's a unique online resource that brings together a range of previously scattered collections. They were scattered between Washington and different places in Poland, in Israel, in London, England, Moscow. We try to have the digitize all those documents, and not just document, and transfer to the archives. And it also includes everything and anything written by researchers doing research on Korczak, or any publications, any books, any exhibitions, any artwork. All of it will be there on this on those digital archives. It's an ongoing project. It's quite impressive what's there, already there, but it's definitely a growing project. So taken together, we hope that association efforts will make a substantial contribution to the spread of Dr. Korczak's teachings and legacy in Canada and throughout the English-speaking world by developing university courses, organizing lectures, symposia that bring together a broad community of stakeholders in children's rights issues, and making available and accessible writings by Dr. Korczak and his disciples, if I can call it this way. We hope to make his philosophy of educating the whole child a living legacy. So now I would like to tell you a few words about the project, meaning the proposed chair in interdisciplinary studies on children's rights, education, and well-being. Now, I of course would like to emphasize what's maybe common between other similar positions, but also what's in a way different than other chairs at other universities. So we have again a list of different activities between in partnership with the Faculty of Education at the University of BC. You can see the list on the left side. On the right side, there's a picture from the exhibition that we put together back, I would say, more than 10 years ago, and it's shown at the university, at the Faculty of Education, but it was shown all across Canada in different places in the States. It's Janusz Korczak and Children of the Ghetto. And at the bottom, you see unveiling of Korczak plaque. You can't see well, but here it's a Korczak with children. So we've been building a strong partnership with the education. We have those events. We cooperate for over 10 years. And the chair that we propose, and we already had a couple of meetings with people from the Faculty of Education, and we put sort of proposal together. It will, of course, the chair, the professorship would cover research and education, as in most cases in wood. But what's added to it, it's advocacy aspect. So chair in interdisciplinary studies on children's rights, education, and well-being, the key activities. So research, you can read yourself, interdisciplinary research and scholarly inquiry, publications, and different aspects of research. You see education on the right side, academic courses, professional development, etc., etc. But what's important, you know, it again falls more or less within the scope of what's expected from the professor. Now, the advocacy, that's the addition that we put quite an emphasis on. And this is speaking engagements, seminars, conferences, and so on and so on. Now, the chair holder will be full-time faculty member with a tenure or tenured or on the tenure track. Again, you see the description of it, but then there's an additional position coupled together with a chair, and that's public education manager. It's a staff position, it's not a research position, and a person will be involved in events of function, organization, management, communication, outreach activities, active liaison with relevant institutions, and publication dissemination, and this kind of a position. There will be also a graduate student and postdoctoral fellow. That's sort of a broad description. And at the same time, we're talking about the advisory board that would be in some way consulted. And the advisory board, we see the association being part of it, academic research and education advisors, meaning that we would love to see the round table and people representing different faculties, medical school, social work, of course, education, because this is, it's going to be located, but the law school and so on and so on, sitting around the table and contributing to whatever is happening under this umbrella of the chair. Public sector representative, that's very important to us to have an input, and what's extremely important is indigenous representatives being part of it. And let's talk about changing world. The next and the last slide, that's the good news. 100 children and 100 individuals who are people. Not people to be, not people of tomorrow, but people now, right now, today. It was a quote from Dr. Korczak. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. Over to Erwin.
I just wanted to add, only for 1 minute, our call to action to people here or anybody who will watch the video is really, we want to make that chair happen. I think we have strong interest and cooperation from UBC, and now really it's about sealing the deal and then finding ways to make that chair happen in terms of financial support and other kinds. So we are looking for people who would say, yeah, I'm willing to say, I think this is a good idea. So a kind of endorsement. and building that kind of, Cindy would call it, Cindy Blackstock, I remember in her talks, calls it mosquito advocacy. About 1,000 mosquitoes in a tent can drive somebody out of that tent where one mosquito might not be able to do it. So the mosquito advocacy approach, with as many endorsements as we can get, is very helpful. I think if people know people who we should be connected to, and you do, then that is another step in terms of being a champion and helping us get to places where we should be presenting in a shorter way, perhaps, but talking about the chair and getting more endorsements, perhaps finding some pot of gold at the end of some rainbow. And then if there's the champions, and then if you want to be that, we want to hear from you. And if you want to sit with us and the small group of people who are actually going to make this happen, please let us know, and we will welcome you into our, speaking of tents, our small but roomy enough tent, if you want to be under our roof and help us make this happen. That's my call to action to you. Jerry is the best person to email, I would say, if you're interested. So Jerry, give your email, and then of course we're open for any comments or questions about anything we've said.
Right. My email is quite simple. It's Nussbaum, one word, @gmail.com. So if you see on the invitation spelling of my name, you need to just add @gmail.com. So that's the whole scope of it.
That's great. Thank you so much, Erwin and Jerry. I see that Kate put your email in the chat there, Jerry. So people should have access to that. Does anyone have any questions or comments that they might like to share?
I do.
Or if there's any kind of comments. Yeah, Candace.
Hi, my name is Candace Blake Amarante, and I'm on the board of the CCRC. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very informative. I would like to ask a quick question about the chair. Janusz Korczak has been a huge inspiration to me as a children's book writer. I try to follow his footsteps and incorporate children's rights in my creative writing for children. However, in your chair, I wondered, you don't really touch upon literature and creative writing, or I didn't see it, or I didn't know if it was incorporated in education. It's such a huge component of his legacy. I really enjoyed King Matt, and I'm about to read Katek the Wizard. I've also read When I'm Little Again, which I think all teachers should read, even though, you know, it's a bit outdated, given that he spoke mostly about ending corporal punishment of children at schools. But I still think it's worth reading in this day and age. But if you could speak to how you will incorporate some of his children's writing and his creative writing in this chair, I think we could benefit a little bit from that. Thank you.
You know, I wish I could say I have a clear vision of how to take care of it. We do have a clear vision that we would like to present it. They are wonderful, what you were just mentioning, wonderful, wonderful translations, because that's not always the case about those two books that you just mentioned. And I just bought on Amazon, I think, and forwarded to our the recipient of the medal, Korczak medal, 2 weeks ago. I mean, not to her, but to her 10 years, 9 and 12 years old kids. So I wish I had a vision of how to promote it among children. I really don't. I would extremely strongly support that. That's a wonderful idea. And one thing that we do attempt to do for the last quite some time is to have published, on one hand, a book about Korczak, written there are two great books, illustrated books for young kids like ages 6, 7, 8. One was really published in English at some point. It's published in Spanish, German, Japanese, Chinese, and so on, by a Polish writer that lives in New York, about Korczak, and we can't get it republished. And the other book, it's a book that, again, written in Polish with absolutely fabulous illustrations for children. Book was published in Korean, Chinese, Japanese, Spanish, German, French. Those are I think it's 14 languages, never published in English. And I've spoke already to quite a few publishers in North America, and most of them either declined, and maybe half of them said it's too good. It's not good for publication, not commercially not good. But we do pay attention to this group, and we wish we had resources to have somebody that would really promote it, for the sake of not organization, but for promoting the Korczak's ideas. And if you can see any role for you formally being part of the group or not, doing so, I can connect you with different people. We do have connections, and I think it's really, really needed. Just one more sentence that I would like to add. There's also no publication about Korczak for youth, like 12, 14, 16, and we are in the process of we commissioned a book. It's a graphic novel or comics, whatever you prefer to call it. It's going to be quite a substantial book, about 250 pages. The first chapter is completely finished. It's about a quarter of the book, but we hope that towards the end of next year, it will be published too. So sorry I missed your name, but I cordially invite you to get in touch with me outside the scope of this meeting.
Will do.
I just want to add,
Thank
Candace,
you.
if I can. I think you identified a blind spot, because it's not, I get it. We should promote Korczak to children and tell kids what he's about. But your point that I've got, I'm so impressed you knew and you used his writings and your writing. So I want to find out where I can find out about your work. But the blind spot is, like, when we presented this, and I don't talk about King Matt.
I know.
Writers like you
I know.
he did for children, not about himself. Of course, he never wrote a book about himself for kids, but why don't I? And that's a blind spot. And it's when I talk, and I'm gonna encourage Jerry to say, when we put together a chair or a presentation, what you just said is included.
Okay.
Because you're right. Writers of kids' books should be influenced by how he did it.
Yes. He's very, very controversial in this day and age, especially King Matt, especially the portrayal of the young Black girl. I totally understand that. I totally understand the controversies that can come about if you promote a book like that, get out of context. But this is the thing, there's a way of teaching that book in its proper context, and that's what we have to figure that out, I think. But and I think people are too quick to dismiss it because they're afraid. They're afraid to touch it in this day and age when identity politics is so rife. So, but I feel that there are ways to come across that to promote this legendary man and his work. So I feel like there definitely needs to be something done on that front in both education and creative writing.
I could tell you, Candace, I wish I could say that I was that intentional and I did not mention it because I knew, I read King Matt, I knew about that problem. That wasn't the reason. Is like, you actually identified a blind spot, and I thought, oh, geez, good one. So thank you for that feedback.
Great. Does anyone else have, I think there's one more comment in the chat here. I'll just read the chat here. So Deborah says, apologies as I'm entering between meetings, but Candace's question got me thinking that it would be wonderful to connect with medical faculty. Family doctors play such an important role and can promote children's rights and CRC concept among families. I also see actually one hand up here. So here, oh, there we go. Yeah.
Hi, sorry. So I'm Jean-Frédéric JF. I'm a PhD student at the University of Ottawa in the Faculty of Law. I am on unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe land. And I think the power of this potential chair is its interdisciplinarity. I think that this discussion has has gone around that a lot. And I think the idea of having artistic creation in there is another way of if we could really show how, I mean, I think that from the child rights, like legal world, we talk about mainstreaming, right? But the idea of like, if you really, bring children's rights into various disciplines and show how those disciplines together can work towards a better world. I think that's the whole point here. I think that is a big power for this chair. I don't have any kind of authority or connections or anything, but I think it's that specific aspect is very much in the spirit of what I've read of Korczak's, and I think is probably the way that you'll be able to really lean into that as a means of getting people interested and getting a lot of getting those mosquitoes there is about medicine. We talk about law, we talk about education and things like that. So I just wanted to share that. I think it's great. And if I can be of assistance, let me know. I'm early in my studies, but I'd be happy to be somehow involved. So,
well, two things. Well, first of all, if you can kindly leave your name and so on, we'll be delighted to be in touch with you. And one comment that I would like to make: we've been over the years trying to emphasize this interprofessional, interdisciplinary, intersectorial approach. So staying within the university and combining different people from different faculties, it's a very important thing. But it's not just saying it's a very important thing. One of the part of the presentation was a lecture series that happened over, I think, 6 sessions all together, September to June 2016 and 17, I think it was. And it started with a children's rights segment. It was like a 2.5-hour segment, and children's rights for everybody, of course. It was not particularly for a particular professional group, but for everybody. But then the next one was the presentation on education, children's rights and education. By the way, there was a very interesting panel. The first one had a panel of young people in their 20s, but the second had 11 years old panelists, which was a wonderful thing. Then there was another section was about children's rights, indigenous children's rights, with Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond. I don't know if those names are known enough on the East Coast, but they are definitely very prominent people were involved there. Then we had a section run by pediatricians, for example. It was a wonderful thing, but I remember we had a pre-meeting, pre-session, again, 2.5 or 3 hours long. We had a conversation, and they said, "Oh, we can bring lots of good guys, lots of good pediatricians." And I said, "That's wonderful, but what I want you to do, I want them to sit in the last row, not in the first row. I want you to talk about your issues, things seen by you. What are the issues to share it with other people, not just within your circle of other pediatricians." So that's important, the communication, not just having different sectors, like there was another session, social workers, etc., but to get outside. Just don't have a presentation within your seminar conference and who is there? Everybody from the same profession you are. Get outside of it. And of course, we would eventually love to be in a position that it's intersectoral, that we go and we communicate in a nice, efficient way with the community, with the Society for Children and Youth, the Office of the Ombudsman, and different institutions that are involved in it, and different sectors. That's also like ministries that they are finally they sign on the dotted line. So it's not keeping it within Faculty of Education, tied, doing research, publishing the research, but disseminating this information. So those are just my comments.
Thanks so much, Jerry. It looks like we've come to the end of the webinar here. I know a few people have to head out, but there's one more comment here, maybe for you to consider. Just Ruth had asked if you've connected with Joan Durant at the University of Manitoba. I know Joan's work focuses on Section 43 of the Criminal Code, so that might be another really good connection there. For those that have to head out, Jerry's email is in the chat there, so definitely please feel free to reach out. And Kate and I can also pass on additional contact information as well if needed.
Excellent.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Daniela.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the time, and thank you for joining us and being and listening. And as Erwin introduced me, it's not always easy, but I'm trying my best not to be overly boring and vicious.
No, it was a great presentation. We really appreciate it. Definitely lots for us to think about and just resources to share, which I think is always kind of one of the most important things that comes out of a webinar like this.